The early 19th century was a time of fire and blood in southern Africa. A storm was gathering. The Mifakane, the scattering. At the center, the ascendant Zulu kingdom and Shaka Zulu. His new methods of warfare, his disciplined impis, his unyielding ambition. Entire communities were uprooted, villages burned to the ground, people scattered to the winds, fear, displacement, a desperate struggle for survival. The old ways were shattering, the land cried out in agony. Amidst this vortex, a young chief named Lepoko was coming of age. Born into the Mokoteli, a minor clan far from centers of power, he would become Moshweshwe. Unlike rising warlords, he watched not just as a warrior, but as a thinker. He saw the cycle of violence as a self-devouring monster. While others saw enemies to conquer, he saw broken people needing sanctuary, a place of safety where none existed. Not to conquer, but to build. Not an empire by the spear, a nation by an idea. The idea that people, even former enemies, could find strength and safety together. The seed of the Basotho nation. While the great warlords of the Mefakane were known as the Destroyers, Moshweshwe began to earn a different title. Morena Oabalanka, the chief of the beggars. He was the gatherer of men. His philosophy was revolutionary for its time. Instead of raiding his neighbors for cattle and land, he offered protection and a place to belong. He understood a fundamental truth that others missed in their lust for power. He knew that a nation's true wealth was not in its cattle herds, but in its people. Every refugee who came to him was not another mouth to feed, but another pair of hands to build, another mind to contribute, another spear to defend the community. Moshweshwe's leadership style was rooted in wisdom and persuasion, not brute force. He was a master orator, able to calm frayed nerves and inspire hope with his words. He listened more than he commanded. When rival clans or broken families sought his protection, he did not demand their subservience. Instead, he integrated them into his growing community, respecting their leaders and their traditions. He used the traditional Southern African institution of the Pitso, or public assembly, to give everyone a voice in the affairs of the nation. This inclusive approach built a powerful sense of shared identity and loyalty among people from dozens of different backgrounds. He was a pragmatist, a keen observer of the world around him. He learned from every encounter and every challenge. He adopted new ideas and technologies when they served his people. The horse, the gun, and defensive strategies he observed in his enemies, yet he never lost sight of his core values of compassion and unity. He famously said, "Peace is my sister," a phrase that encapsulated his entire political philosophy. He believed that a lasting peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice and mutual respect, a radical idea in an age of total war. This unique combination of strategic intelligence and profound humanity is what set Moshweshwe apart. He was not a conqueror in the traditional sense, he was a unifier. He built his power not by taking from others, but by giving them a reason to join him. In a landscape dominated by fear, he offered hope. In a time of division, he offered unity. He was crafting a new model of African kingship, one based on diplomacy, generosity, and the radical belief that even in the darkest of times, people could be brought together to build something new and lasting. He was building a nation, one person at a time. Every great founder needs a foundation, and Moshweshwe found his in a geological marvel. It was a flat-topped mountain, rising some 400 feet from the surrounding plains. Its name was Thaba Bosyu, meaning the mountain at night. Legend held that the mountain grew taller after sunset, making it impossible for enemies to assault it under the cover of darkness. While this was folklore, the truth was just as powerful. The mountain was a natural fortress, a sanctuary seemingly designed by nature for a people under siege. Its sheer sandstone cliffs were nearly impossible to scale, accessible only by a handful of narrow, easily defended passes. The strategic genius of choosing Thaba Bosyu cannot be overstated. From its broad, flat summit, Moshweshwe's lookouts could see for miles in every direction, spotting approaching armies long before they reached the base. The plateau itself was large enough to hold thousands of people, their homes, vast herds of cattle. Most importantly, it had its own natural springs, providing a secure source of fresh water. This was the critical element that made long sieges possible. An army could surround the mountain for weeks, but as long as the Basotho had water, grain, and cattle, they could outlast any foe. Thaba Bosyu was not just a refuge, it was a self-sustaining world. Moshweshwe and his people moved to this mountain fortress around 1824, a pivotal moment in their history. It was a definitive statement. They were no longer a wandering band of refugees but a people with a permanent home, a center of gravity in a chaotic world. The mountain became the heart of the Basotho nation, It was the king's capital, the military headquarters, the national archive, and the sacred center of their spiritual life. To be on Thaba Boshu was to be safe. It was a powerful symbol of security and endurance that drew even more followers to Moshweshwe's cause, knowing he had secured a place that no enemy could easily conquer. The psychological power of the mountain was as important as its physical defenses. It became a legend. Warriors from rival tribes and later, European commandos, would gaze up at its imposing cliffs with a sense of dread. The Basotho, in contrast, looked upon it with love and a feeling of invincibility. It was their ark, their shield against the floods of violence sweeping the land. Moshweshwe had not just found a stronghold, he had found the physical embodiment of his vision. Thaba Boshu was a symbol of unity, resilience, and the enduring strength of a people gathered together in a place of safety. The chaos of the Mifecain eventually subsided, but it was replaced by a new and more complex threat approaching from the south. First came the Voortrekkers, or Boers, Dutch-speaking farmers migrating away from British rule in the Cape Colony. They arrived in their ox wagons, seeking land and independence, bringing with them guns, a rigid belief in their own supremacy, and an insatiable hunger for territory. Moshweshwe initially pursued a policy of cautious accommodation, allowing some to settle on the edges of his kingdom, hoping to coexist peacefully. However, the Boer conception of land ownership was fundamentally different from that of the Basotho. The Basotho saw land as a communal resource to be shared under the king's authority. The Boers believed in permanent individual ownership defined by legal deeds and fenced boundaries. This cultural misunderstanding quickly led to conflict. The Boers expanded their farms, encroached on Basotho grazing lands, and claimed sovereignty over territory Moshweshwe considered his own. At the same time, another European power was expanding its influence, the British Empire. Moshweshwe was a shrewd political analyst and saw the British as a potential counterweight to the Boers. He astutely observed the friction between the two European groups and sought to exploit it for his own advantage. He initiated contact with British officials and missionaries, whom he welcomed into his kingdom. These missionaries, like Eugene Casalis, became his trusted advisors, teaching him literacy and serving as his scribes and diplomatic envoys. Through them, Moshweshwe began a long and sophisticated correspondence with the British Crown, portraying himself as a civilized and reasonable monarch seeking protection from Boer aggression. This diplomatic dance placed Moshweshwe in an incredibly precarious position. He was juggling three powerful and unpredictable forces: the remnants of the Zulu threat, the land-hungry Boers, and the colossal but distant British Empire. He had to be a warrior, a diplomat, and a prophet all at once. He used force when necessary, leading his armies to defend Basotho lands against Boer commandos. But his true genius lay in his ability to play his opponents against each other, using letters, treaties, and appeals to Queen Victoria's sense of justice as his primary weapons. He was fighting a multi-front war for survival, and the board was constantly changing. The conflict with the Boers of the Orange Free State escalated into a series of brutal wars known as the Sikiti Wars. The Boers, with their superior firepower, repeatedly laid waste to the lowlands, employing a scorched earth policy, destroying crops and starving the Basotho into submission. But the ultimate prize, Thaba Boshu, remained elusive. In 1865, a Boer commando led by Lau Wepener attempted a daring assault on the mountain fortress. They were met with a furious defense. The Basotho, fighting for their homes, their king, their lives, rained down stones, assegais, and gunfire from the cliffs, repelling the attack and killing Wepener in the process. The mountain at night held firm. Despite the heroic defense, the wars took a terrible toll. The destruction of their farmlands brought famine and ruin to the Basotho people. Moshweshwe, now an old man, saw that military victory alone would not be enough to save his nation. In a final brilliant act of diplomacy, he played his last card. For years he had petitioned the British government for protection. In 1868, as his kingdom stood on the brink, he made his most desperate appeal, famously saying, "I am like a man who sees a sharp stake and is unable to avoid it. I must fall on it, but I beg that I may be allowed to fall into the arms of the Queen." His plea was finally heard. The British, worried about regional instability and the growing power of the Boer republics, agreed to annex the territory. On March 12, 1868, Basutoland became a British protectorate. It was a bittersweet victory. Moshweshwe had to cede significant portions of fertile land to the Orange Free State, a painful concession that haunts the nation today. He lost full sovereignty, but he had saved his people from complete conquest and dispersion. He chose the lesser of two evils, sacrificing land and autonomy to preserve his nation. Moshweshwe died in 1870, 2 years after securing his people's future. He was buried on the summit of Thaba Bosue, the mountain fortress that was cradle and shield. His legacy is nothing short of miraculous. While other African kingdoms were shattered by colonial powers, Moshweshwe's creation survived. Today, the independent nation of Lesotho exists as a sovereign kingdom entirely surrounded by South Africa, a direct testament to his foresight and diplomacy. Moshweshwe's story is an enduring lesson in the power of wisdom over might, of unity over division, and of a leader who built a fortress not just of rock, but of compassion. He used a single mountain as the anvil upon which he forged a nation, a fortress in the sky that became a symbol of unconquerable will. His kingdom stands today, a living monument to the invincible mountain king who could not be conquered.